You failed at something that mattered, and now you're doing what everyone does. You're making it mean something about who you are. That's the costly mistake. Not the failure itself, but the story you're building on top of it, brick by brick, in the quiet hours when nobody's watching. You're turning an event into an identity. And here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud: the failure isn't what's destroying you. Your interpretation of it is. The failure happened. It's over. But you keep reliving it, keep replaying it, keep feeding it, keep letting it whisper that you're not enough. That's the real collapse. Not the falling, but the refusing to get back up because you've decided the fall proved something permanent. Here's the thesis, and I want you to hold on to it through this entire video. Failure is something that happens to you, but being a failure is something you do to yourself. The first is an event. The second is a choice. A choice most people make unconsciously, without realizing they're making it, because nobody ever taught them the difference. That's what this video is about. 5 Stoic lessons on how to fail without falling apart. Not by pretending it doesn't hurt. Not by pasting on a smile and reciting affirmations. But by installing a mental operating system that lets you take the hit, absorb the impact, and stand back up with your identity intact. Let's start with the first lesson, and it comes straight from the way Marcus Aurelius processed the world. He had a practice, a daily, deliberate practice, of stripping events of their moral weight. Not their weight as facts, but their weight as verdicts. Something happened. That's it. It happened. The sun came up. The rain fell. The deal fell through. The relationship ended. The project collapsed. These are events. They exist in the world the same way a storm exists or a rock exists. They don't carry moral meaning. They don't contain a judgment about your worth. You add that. You bolt it on after the fact. Marcus understood this at a level most people never reach, and he did it while ruling an empire. He lost children. He faced betrayal. He dealt with war, plague, political treachery, and the slow grinding weight of a position he never really wanted. And his response, again and again, was the same: this happened. It is not me. It is something that occurred near me. The event is neutral. My judgment of it is where the suffering begins. Think about what you're doing right now with your failure. You got rejected. You didn't get the job. The business didn't work. The person left. Whatever it is, strip it down. What actually happened? Be honest. What literally, factually occurred? Write it down if you need to. Not the feeling. Not the implication. Not the story. Just the event. Because here's what nobody tells you: the event is usually survivable. It's the narrative you wrap around it that becomes lethal. You didn't just fail at a thing. You told yourself it means you'll always fail. You told yourself it means you weren't good enough to begin with. You told yourself it means something fundamental is broken inside you. None of that is in the event. All of it is in you. That's not a criticism. That's a door. Because if the meaning is something you added, then the meaning is something you can change. Which brings us to the second lesson. Viktor Frankl spent years in a concentration camp. He lost everything: family, freedom, health, certainty. And in the middle of that, he arrived at an understanding that reshaped how we think about human suffering. He realized that the last human freedom, the one thing that could never be taken from you, even when everything else was stripped away, is the freedom to choose your response to any given set of circumstances. You don't always get to choose what happens. You always get to choose what it means. Most people let the failure choose for them. The failure walks in the door and they hand it the keys. It decides what they are. It decides what they're worth. It decides whether they try again. They become passive participants in their own identity construction. The failure happened, and then they let the failure write the story of who they are going forward. That's abdication. That's not resilience. That's surrender dressed up as realism. You hear people say things like, "Well, I guess I'm just not cut out for this." Or, "Maybe this is a sign I should give up." Or the worst one, "Maybe I'm just not that person." As if the universe is sending you personalized messages through your setbacks. It's not. The universe doesn't care. The failure doesn't care. You're the only one assigning meaning here, and you're doing it badly. Here's the reframing. You failed. Now you have a choice, not about whether it happened, but about what it means going forward. You can let it mean you're fundamentally flawed and should stop trying. Or you can let it mean you just gathered data that makes your next attempt sharper, wiser, more likely to succeed. Same event. Two completely different trajectories. And the only difference is the meaning you chose to assign. Frankl didn't survive because he was optimistic. He survived because he refused to let his circumstances author his identity. He held the pen. Even in Auschwitz. Especially in Auschwitz. And you're going to let a failed job interview or a collapsed project or a broken relationship take the pen from you? Really? That's what you're going to hand over your authorship for? Hold on to that. Because we're not done. The third lesson is about what you do next. Not what you feel, what you do. There's a framework for handling failure that the Stoics lived by, even though they never called it a framework. It's simple. 3 moves. And it works because it bypasses the emotional spiral entirely. First, you accept what happened. Completely. No excuses. No blame shifting. No cushioning. You look at the failure and you say, "This is what happened. I own it. My part. Their part. The circumstances. All of it. I'm not going to pretend it was less than it was. I'm not going to minimize it to protect my ego. I'm going to face it exactly as it is." That acceptance, that raw, unflinching acknowledgement of reality, is the first move, and it's the one most people skip. They skip it because acceptance feels like defeat. It feels like agreement. It feels like saying, "Yes, I am a failure." But that's not what acceptance is. Acceptance is simply seeing clearly. You can't navigate from a map you won't look at. Second, you redirect. You take the emotional energy, the anger, the shame, the frustration, the grief, and you don't try to suppress it, you don't try to numb it, you channel it. Into what? Into the next action. Not into a grand plan. Not into a 5-year comeback strategy. Into the next concrete thing you can do in the next hour. Send the email. Make the call. Start the draft. Have the conversation. Clean the room. Go for the run. The Stoics understood something that modern psychology has only recently confirmed: action is the antidote to despair. Not because the action fixes everything, but because the action moves you out of the paralysis of rumination. You're not pretending the failure didn't happen. You're refusing to let it be the last thing that happens. Third, you extract the lesson. This is the part that separates the people who fail and grow from the people who fail and repeat. You ask yourself, not in a journaling exercise, not as a performative ritual, but as a genuine inquiry. What did this teach me? What was the gap between what I expected and what happened? What did I control that I didn't handle well? What did I not control that I wasted energy worrying about? What assumption was wrong? What skill was missing? What pattern do I recognize now that I couldn't see before? These three moves, accept, redirect, extract, they're not a one-time process. They're a practice. You run them every time. And each time, the gap between the failure and your recovery gets shorter. Not because the failures hurt less. Because you get faster at not turning them into identity. That's the third lesson. The fourth lesson is subtler, and it's the one that will change how you see everything. Most people think failure is the opposite of success. It's not. Failure is part of success. It's not a detour. It's not a setback on the road. It is the road. Every person you admire, every achievement you revere, every life that looks like it was built in a straight line, it wasn't. It was built on failures that you never saw because nobody puts their failures in the highlight reel. The Stoics had a word for this idea, or something close to it. They called it the obstacle and the path being the same thing. Marcus wrote about it. He said that what blocks the way becomes the way. Not in some motivational poster sense. He meant it literally, practically, as a mental model. The thing that stops you is the thing that teaches you. The thing that hurts you is the thing that strengthens you. The failure that makes you want to quit is the failure that, if used correctly, makes quitting impossible to justify. Think about it. What does success teach you? That you were right. That your assumptions were correct. That you can keep doing what you're doing. Success is a terrible teacher. It feels good, but it doesn't transform you. It confirms you. Failure, on the other hand, failure is the only thing that shows you where the cracks are. Where your preparation was thin. Where your thinking was lazy. Where your ego was doing the driving while you thought discipline was behind the wheel. Failure is data. Failure is feedback. Failure is the universe telling you, not that you're worthless, but that your approach was wrong. Or your timing was off. Or your expectation was misaligned with reality. That's it. That's all it's saying. And if you listen, if you actually listen instead of collapsing into the story of your own inadequacy, you walk away from every failure better than you walked in. This is what it means to fail forward. Not to pretend the failure didn't happen. Not to grit your teeth and push through without learning. But to treat every failure as raw material for the next move. The Stoics didn't see obstacles as things to endure. They saw them as things to use. There's a difference. Endurance is passive. It's survival. Using is active. It's transformation. You're not just surviving the failure. You're mining it for everything it's worth. And here's the thing, the failure is already rich with value. It's already loaded with information you couldn't have gotten any other way. You couldn't have learned this by succeeding. You couldn't have learned it by reading about it. You couldn't have learned it by watching someone else go through it. You had to fail. You had to feel the ground give way beneath you. Because that's the only way to learn where the solid ground is. So the question isn't whether you failed. You did. Everyone does. The question is whether you're going to use it or let it use you. Whether you're going to let it make you sharper or let it make you smaller. Whether you're going to walk away from it with new data or with an old wound that you'll carry for the next decade. Now, the fifth lesson. And this is the one that ties everything together. This is the daily practice. Because everything I've told you so far, stripping the event of moral weight, choosing your meaning, accepting and redirecting and extracting, seeing the obstacle as the path. None of it works if it's just something you do once. It has to become a way of seeing. A default setting. A reflex. The practical distinction between failing and being a failure is not a one-time realization. It's a daily maintenance. It's something you practice the way you practice anything, through repetition, through small moments, through the accumulation of 1,000 tiny decisions that all point in the same direction. Here's how you build it. Every day, you fail at something small. You miss a workout. You say the wrong thing in a conversation. You procrastinate on a task. You lose your temper for 3 seconds. You make a bad call. And in each of those moments, each one, you practice the same thing. You notice the failure. You resist the urge to make it mean something about who you are. You accept it. You redirect. You extract. And you move on. That's the practice. Small failures, handled well, train you for the big ones. You're building the muscle. You're installing the operating system. So that when the real thing hits, the big failure, the one that actually matters, the one that knocks the wind out of you, you don't spiral. You don't collapse. You don't hand over the pen. You've done this 1,000 times before. You know the moves. You know the shape of it. You know that the event is not the verdict. You know that the meaning is yours to choose. You know that the obstacle is the path. You know that failing is what you did, not what you are. Most people wait for the catastrophic failure to start building resilience. That's like waiting for the war to start learning to fight. You build the capacity in peacetime. You build it in the small moments. You build it when the stakes are low so that it's there when the stakes are high. And here's what nobody tells you about this practice. It changes you. Not superficially. Fundamentally. You start to walk through the world differently. Lighter. Less fragile. Less attached to outcomes as proof of your worth. You start to see failure the way a scientist sees a failed experiment, not as a reason to quit, but as information that narrows the search. You start to take risks you wouldn't have taken before, because the fear of failure no longer controls you. Not because you don't feel the fear, you always will, but because you've trained yourself to act anyway. To move anyway. To choose the meaning anyway. That's quiet power. That's what the Stoics had. Not immunity to pain. Not some superhuman ability to feel nothing. They felt everything. Marcus felt the weight of his losses. Epictetus felt the injustice of his enslavement. Seneca felt the terror of his exile. They felt it all. They just didn't let the feeling become the verdict. They didn't let the event become the identity. They held the line between what happened to them and what they chose to become in response to it. And that line, that invisible, crucial, daily maintained line, is the difference between failing and being a failure. Failing is an event that passes through your life. Being a failure is a story you tell about yourself that outlives the event by years. The first is inevitable. The second is optional. The first happens to everyone. The second is chosen by those who don't know they're choosing. You're choosing. Right now. With this failure. With whatever it is that's sitting heavy in your chest as you listen to this. You're choosing. Not whether it happened, that's settled. But what it means. What it makes you. What you do next. Whether you let it write your story or whether you pick up the pen and write your own. Here's what I know about you. You've failed before. you'll fail again. And every single time, you have the same choice. The event doesn't change. Your response to it can. The failure doesn't get to decide who you are. Only you do. And the moment you truly understand that, not as a concept, not as a quote, but as a lived, embodied, daily practice, failure loses its grip on you. Not because it stops hurting. It will always hurt. But because you stop letting the hurt become the verdict. You are not your failures. You are what you do after them. Stay standing.